and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be spending some time this hour talking about classical Christian education. If you find yourself saying, well, I'm not exactly sure what that is, that's exactly why we're doing the program. And we are just delighted to have in studio with us today Dr. Robert Littlejohn. He is the head of school at the Covenant School in Dallas, and in many ways has really brought a wealth of experience to the conversation we're going to have today. Individual with a PhD in biology, and an individual that has published quite a bit in the fields of ecology, plant physiology, biochemistry, science, educational theory, but served for 13 years as the head of school at the Trinity Academy in Raleigh, North Carolina. Also, in the past, has also served as the academic vice president at Covenant College there in Lookout Mountain, and also has been the founding headmaster of the New Covenant Schools in Virginia, to mention just a few. Also served as the executive director of the Society for Classical Learning. Might just mention, in addition to that, we've also posted on our website, pointofview.net, a book that he co-authored, Wisdom and Eloquence, The Christian Paradigm for Classical Learning. Robert Littlejohn and Charles Evans are the authors of that. It's published by Crossway Books. Still might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it very easy for you to order it there as well. And Dr. Robert Littlejohn, it's just great to have you in studio with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You have been in a number of different venues over the years doing classical Christian education, so you've had a chance to see it in ways that others may have not, because you've been in North Carolina, you've been in Virginia, you're here in Dallas. But this movement has been really kind of springing up all over the country, hasn't it?
It has. It's really about 30 years in the making, and it's been exciting to see just going from literally one school that you might call it a neoclassical and Christian school to literally hundreds today.
Yes. Well, I'm going to try as best as we can over the next hour to try to explain what that is. I might just mention to our listeners that if you have someone in a Christian school or a classical Christian school and you have a comment or question, feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Since we also broadcast live on Facebook, there's a place where you can leave a message there in case you don't want to necessarily talk on the phone, but make a comment or two. You can do that as well. And when we talk about classical Christian education, a lot of people take it back to Charlotte Mason. And in your particular material that we have on the website at Covenant School, you do mention that name. So kind of take us from there, because that's one of those issues where a lot of people say, okay, I know what Christian education is. What's classical Christian education?
Yeah. It's and right, if you ask a dozen different people, you'll get a dozen different answers.
I would imagine, yeah.
And right, so Charlotte Mason was an educator in the 19th century, and the Covenant School in particular is really one of a handful of the classical Christian schools that has a strong emphasis drawing on Charlotte Mason's principles and her teaching, introduced really to the Christian world of the 20th century by Susan Schaeffer Macaulay. And the Covenant School actually has a close association with the Macaulays going back to their inception, to our inception 25 years ago, celebrating this year our 25th anniversary year. So Charlotte Mason and her teaching strongly influences the Covenant School here in Dallas, as it does a number of schools across the nation. Basically, Charlotte Mason brings to the fore a sense of wonder and nurture getting students out into nature, forming life habits, an emphasis on short lessons, if you will, keeping in mind the child's attention span. So I like to call it teaching with the grain. And in more recent years, I've come to call it teaching with the brain, because the methods that we use, certainly in a Charlotte Mason approach and in the broader context, a classical and Christian approach, we're teaching in ways that are well suited to a child's development.
Well, and one of the things that we will certainly be talking about is the difference between having enough discipline and some flexibility. But there is a sense in which you might call it delight-directed education. In other words, just really playing on the interest at that age level, that grade level, and those interests in terms of that. Is that fair?
It's very fair. In other words, again, teaching with the grain. Engaging students in activities and learning activities that they love, that they enjoy, and that have been tested over time and proven to be those activities that kids just engage with.
And again, when you talk about tested over time, a lot of people might say, well, what does that mean? And there are certain pieces of art, there's certain music, there's certain literature that has stood the test of time. And one of the arguments I make sometimes when I end up talking about the public schools is that they're so much into the trends. And the idea is that I'm going to have you read some obscure author writing about some obscure topic that 10 years from now I sincerely doubt anybody's even going to know about. Shakespeare, Bach, Beethoven, the great authors, the great musicians, the great writers, they've stuck around for a long time. I think they'll be around even when we're gone, don't you think?
Absolutely. And again, Charlotte Mason would urge that children, the very young children, would read true books. She would call them great books, and then that great books tradition continues right up through the senior year.
Yes, and again, that's something which I want to get back to when we come back from our break. But just the idea of exposing them to things which will stretch them. I mean, right now we have sort of a dumbed down philosophy of education in sometimes not just the public schools, but sometimes even in the Christian schools, And so you're really saying, let's kind of raise the standard a little bit and recognize that, yes, these are difficult works or difficult issues to address, but these have enduring value and principles. And by stretching these individuals, they will reach up rather than just dumb down. Is that true?
Precisely, yeah. Unless the student has the opportunity to flex, as it were, the mental muscles, then they don't really grow. Just this morning, a Covenant faculty member sent me a copy of an article from The Atlantic reporting on students who are protesting because they are being required to stand in front of a class and give a presentation. And that causes anxiety. And, of course, anxiety in our culture today is quite real, and educators need to be concerned and aware of that. But our students, he also shared this in his own classes, and our students just laughed at the prospect of protesting.
Yes.
Student presentation. This is one of the methodologies that really sets classical learning apart.
I would think so.
And as you know, today's employers are just crying for the colleges and universities to provide their potential hires, their new hires, the knowledge, skills, and virtues that they need in the workplace. And it's just not happening.
Well, and again, one of the things I've noticed is if you look at some of the SAT scores, for example, you compare public school to religious schools to independent schools to the classical Christian schools, it just goes up and up and up. So you can see there's some value there as well. But we need to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to put a word on the table, and then we'll explain it when we come back from a break. The trivium, what does that mean, and how does that relate to classical Christian education? Perhaps some of you have some comments or questions you've always wanted to ask somebody who is an expert in the field. We are privileged to have with us today Dr. Robert Littlejohn, co-author of the book Wisdom and Eloquence, also, of course, an individual head of school at the Covenant School in Dallas. So we've got a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, in theaters September 14th, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Robert Littlejohn, and as I mentioned before, head of school at the Covenant School. If you, by the way, would like to know a little bit more about the Covenant School, we have a link to that on the website. We also, of course, have mentioned his book. It's published by Crossway. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but I thought it would be a lot easier just to have a link there so you could order it. It's published by Crossway. It's available in paperback and Kindle, and we have that link on our website as well. Okay, Dr. Littlejohn, we talked about a number of things, but I mentioned a word, trivium. Now, not everybody uses that word, I understand that, but it's mentioned in your documents there at the Covenant School. And explain that, because that, I think, gets us back to this conversation about what's appropriate at which age and what, in terms of stages of development, might be best in terms of education. And I think that this was developed during the Middle Ages, but I think it's applicable even today in the 21st century, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's the trivium is roughly half of the classical liberal arts.
Yes.
The trivium, meaning the three-way pathway, would be first, if you will, among those arts, and then the quadrivium, the four-way pathway. The quadrivium includes arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, interestingly enough, and we would call those the mathematical arts.
Yes.
The trivium includes grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and we might call those the language arts, if you will, the arts necessary to understand and use language efficiently. But in 1947, I believe it was, Dorothy L. Sayers, who's a bit of a hero in the classical Christian school movement,
For sure.
Gave a presentation, a brief speech, as it were, and she shared an insight in which she tied the trivium of old, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, to stages of child development. And what she really saw there was that in the early ages, the early stages of their development, they need to do things that feel like grammar, that these are the rudimentary principles of the various disciplines, and gaining those rudimentary skills that will serve them well as they continue in their learning. And then as they move into those, what we now would call the middle school years, when children become naturally argumentative and resistant to just about anything, that these are the dialectic or the logic years.
Yes.
If we can capture that that sense of adventure and testing of everything, then we really can direct their learning in some wonderful ways. And then finally, the rhetoric, this desire that students grow into during really their high school, perhaps their later high school and early college years, to be expressive. That these, again, it's a matter of teaching with the grain, teaching with methodologies and content that will fit the development of the young person.
And again, when I've watched this played out at different Christian schools where I've spoken, or even being on the board of West Dallas Community School, which uses classical Christian education, or the Cameretta School, or some of the others that have been part of this over the years, one of the things I've been struck by is that really does fit together, because when you go into a grade school class, the kids really do want to memorize. And so it's a good time to teach them their ABCs, a good time to teach them their math and their addition tables, their multiplication tables, and things like that. If you go into the middle school, which we jokingly sometimes around here call them the electric chihuahuas, they are full of enthusiasm and conflict and questioning and that's a perfect time to teach them logic and to even get involved in back and forth debates about various issues. And then before we're ready to send them off to college, that's when the rhetoric becomes important. So it does seem to me that Dorothy Sayers and the so-called lost tools of learning really are a really significant way to structure the school. So how does that play itself out in Covenant School in particular?
Oh, yeah, very, very much so. We literally teach differently at the different stages in our different schools. We've identified, in fact, we name our schools. The younger students are in our grammar school. And starting in 5th grade through 8th grade, those students are in our logic school. In the high school, we call the rhetoric school.
Yeah.
So the emphasis is very clearly on that. And really, I think the best education begins with the end in view. So what we want to do as a classical and Christian school is ask ourselves what knowledge, what skills, what virtues, what experiences do we want our graduates to have? And then we begin to back that down through the ages and the stages, all the way down to kindergarten, so that again, the notion of a class presentation. Well, this art of rhetoric, this ability to speak publicly, is so critical, so important to life and profession, that we don't want students to get away from the Covenant School without having that all important skill. But we can't deliver it to them by just giving them a speech class in the senior year. We really have to anticipate all the way down to the grammar school years and the kindergarten year by getting them accustomed to being up in front of their peers, and perhaps even up in front of a large audience, so that they overcome that fear that every American adult has, the fear of public speaking. It's
They would do anything but speak to a group.
Right. The fear of death is our second greatest fear, and the fear of public speaking is our first. So we rather die than speak in public.
Yeah, it is really amazing.
But not at the Covenant School.
Well, and again, I think we always say at least one or two things controversial on point of view, so I'll make one controversial statement. I've always felt like we've needed classical Christian education for decades. But now with these digital devices in the hands of these young people, the inability for many of them to even make eye contact, the fact that they look like they're praying and really they're looking at their screens. It seems to me that more now than ever we need classical education, if you will, to counter-program against the effect of social media and digital devices. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, those are great questions. the brain is being formed differently by devices.
I think so.
And I'm not saying that we are anti-device. I think we're holding the future in our hands,
Yes.
as it were, with these devices. But teaching students, as it were, in the old tried and true ways is, in my view, the best way to do this. What research has indicated is that when students are distracted through using a device, when they're using technology to learn basic truths, if you will, to learn basic subjects, it is a distraction. And in testing them, assessing their knowledge, the students who learn without technology often outperform those students who learn with the technology.
And I was just thinking about one of the individuals we interviewed years ago was a man by the name of Bill Bennett, who at that time was Secretary of Education. Mm-hmm. And when he was there, he published a little book called What Works. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to guess about this. Every few years there's the new progressive idea about how to teach. And growing up in Berkeley, California, I remember in my senior year, everybody was caught up with that, and no longer did they teach math, but we all got in small groups learning math. And I'm not sure I learned anything about calculus in that class. And really what works was going back and saying, well, what works? Well, what works is when we have a teacher in the front who is teaching and students are listening, where we engage them, but sometimes where we interact with them, that we use very little technology, because most of the time, as you point out, we can look at various kinds of studies that have come out. Everything from when we look at the amount of television that a young person sees before he or she graduates from high school, it is inverse related to academic performance. All those hours in front of the boob tube isn't really helping very much, and it's certainly not creating an inquisitive mind. And some of these other ideas that people say, well, that's just so old-fashioned. Seems to me that, again, classical Christian education has proven the test of time, and this works well if we're going to educate the next generation.
I like to say that what we do doesn't work because it's classical. It's classical because it works.
Yeah.
It has stood the test of time.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about what that looks like in some of these different academic disciplines. Especially since you have a science background, people might say, okay, I can see how you could use grammar, logic, and rhetoric in an English class. Maybe I could see how you could do it in a history class. How does that look in science and some of these other areas in mathematics? And after all, 2 + 2 is equal to 4. So what's the difference with a Christian education in terms of math or science or physics or chemistry? Those are some really important questions, and I know there are other questions maybe you have as well. So if you'd like to leave one on our Facebook post, you can do so, or if you'd like to call in, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about the Covenant School here in Dallas, we have a link to that website. It's available on our website, pointofview.net. If you say, I'd like to learn this, maybe even apply some of it to my kids, the book Wisdom and Eloquence is available, and we have a link to that on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Robert Littlejohn right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Robert Littlejohn and co-author of the book Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian Paradigm for Classical Learning, also the head of school at Covenant School. And I thought for just a few minutes, Dr. Littlejohn, I might just talk about science. You know, some of my degrees are in science. You have a PhD in biology. And I think there is a sense that science is science, mathematics is mathematics. So for just a few minutes, talk about how there would be a distinctively Christian approach to the math and science area. People can see that in philosophy. They can see it, obviously, when we teach Bible and religion, maybe even in English. It's kind of a stumbling block for some of our listeners, I suspect.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned what is a Christian perspective. I guess I might start by suggesting that so many would think that that principles of mathematics and science are, as it were, invented by human beings, but we would say that they are discovered. That God has put them into place, and we get that joy of discovering them, and just as He reveals Himself to us, not only through the written Word, but through the Word of His creation. So that's how we would see science. That's how we would see mathematics, as an expression of who God is to His created beings, to us, His image bearers. But looking at science from a classical perspective as well, we're not talking about going back, millennia and just talking about principles of science and mathematics that are arcane, but rather that we approach science and mathematics as well as a body of knowledge through which, as we embrace it and come to understand it, we learn to think.
Mm-hmm.
And Dorothy L. Sayers, again, famously wrote or said that while we generally succeed in teaching our students subjects, we fail lamentably, on the whole, in teaching them how to think.
Right.
And this is the most important aspect of education. I haven't been at Covenant long enough to bring an anecdote from there, but I'll quote a physics teacher from another school, classical school where I served, who would say to his physics class, yes, this is physics class, but let me explain to you that you are here to learn to think. We're just using physics as the medium to help you
Very good.
Learn to think.
You know, one of the things about science, and I've written about this before, and I know you would agree, is that the whole idea of the scientific method really came from people that had a theistic point of view. Now, some were Christians, others were not, but they started with the assumption that we live in a created universe, that there is a creator, back to your point, that there are principles we can discover, and that there is a uniformitarian kind of philosophy here that we can use our minds to, in a sense, think God's thoughts after him. And so it seems to me that today, when there is always this idea, well, either you accept the Bible or you accept science, the early founders of what we today call the scientific method didn't see that dichotomy. They felt that really out of their biblical view, or in some cases their theistic view, they developed this idea of what we today call the scientific method.
Well, and interestingly, I think science as a way of knowing has changed just over the last 2-3 decades that I've been a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
I remember very clearly being warned by my mentors that we have to remain objective. We have to
Right.
we have to
Yes.
remain above, as it were, the topic, the subject, and that science, if nothing else, should be objective, and scientists should be objective. I'm afraid that for many, science has lost its objectivity.
I agree.
And is filled with much opinion these days. Theories are embraced as fact before the scientific method would have them embraced as fact. So it's interesting to see that science is moving in some ways away from that empirical, research-based way of knowing into more of a philosophy in some respects.
Certainly it is. And one of the individuals we're going to interview next week, Os Guinness, Dr. Os Guinness, is also going to be doing chapel for you at Covenant. And he wrote a book years ago about the gravedigger hypothesis. The modern world was created by really a Judeo-Christian point of view, and now the modern world is trying to dig the grave of Christianity. Well, I see that in science, too, because Christianity and a theistic view gave rise to modern science. Today, modern science is trying to dig the grave of Christianity. And it seems to me that we need to, in our classical Christian schools and other places, develop young people that see that being a scientist is a good thing. Being a Christian and a scientist, don't want to put the two words together because that sends a different direction.
Yes.
That is really a great mission field and a great endeavor for them to be involved in the future.
Well, and my own view is that God uses scientists, both Christians and otherwise, to accomplish his purpose in a fallen world.
Right.
So I think it's a great time to be a scientist and to be a Christian who is a scientist.
Yes.
Along the lines of what you were saying a moment ago, one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain is that God has created man in his own image, and man has returned the favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're not following God as our creator God so much anymore, but creating for ourselves other gods.
I would say so. Let me move to the area of kind of history and English and some of that, because one of the other things I love so much about classical Christian education is it pulls it all together. Those of us that study would study in various bits and pieces, and we would never see the whole. We would never see who was the contemporary of Bach and Beethoven, or who was the contemporary of Isaac Newton. And anytime you walk into any of the classrooms, especially where they're teaching English or history, almost all teachers are visual learners, so you see everything up on the screens, right? And everything up on the walls there. But it's the first time, actually, as an adult, that I realized who were the contemporaries and how all of these philosophies and ideas flowed at a particular time. So there's just another tremendous benefit, I think, of classical Christian education.
Right. No, the whole of the whole of the educational establishment really teaches all these subjects in silos.
Yes.
And one never has anything to do with the other. But you're right. Among the things that we do in a classical and Christian school is blend, as it were, the humanities, especially, so that you'd have history kind of as the driver, and then literature coming alongside. You'd have Bible, some philosophy. All these are integrated. Art and music along with them.
I think so. Yeah.
It's really exciting for parents at the Covenant School to go into a museum, perhaps a museum in a foreign country, and have their 7-year-old serve as the docent in the museum, because they're so familiar with the works of art, and not just able to recognize them, but able to understand and interpret them.
Well, again, you mentioned those silos. It gets back to the idea of a university. I guess it wouldn't be a good Kerby Anderson interview without at least one Latin term. Una, one, veritas, one truth. There was a time in which the university should bring together all truth. Today, the universities are as segmented as they can possibly be. Most people, even in the same area, maybe even in the same academic discipline, don't know what's happening nearby. And I know that's another thing that classical Christian education does. You bring your faculty together, and you too try to teach across the disciplines, so that a person teaching science knows a little bit about music and history. Somebody teaching history knows a little bit about science, and that is really rare in this world today, isn't it?
Oh, right. The university really drives individuals to become hyper specialists, and you end up knowing so very little. I have to confess, in my own situation, it was really through my children and the education that I wanted for them that I began to branch out and away from, plant physiology, which was my narrow specialty, photosynthesis, which was my super narrow specialty. I knew far more about that than anyone ought to, and not much about the other disciplines. So, again, as you've suggested, in the classical Christian school, right, there's this blending of all the disciplines, and drawing on an understanding of one discipline to inform another in the mind of the student.
Again, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll chat just for a few more minutes. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them. But again, let me mention that we're talking today with Dr. Robert Littlejohn, head of school of the Covenant School, and an individual that in the past, of course, has been an academic vice president at Covenant College. Forgot to mention, of course, for our listeners up there in Minnesota, also director of the consortium of 10 colleges and universities in Minnesota. So want to give out a shout there as well. And of course, served as the executive director of the Society for Classical Learning, founding board member of the American School of Lyon in France, and just a number of other things. You can get the entire bio on the website, pointofview.net. You can find out more about the Covenant School. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in case some of you might say, I might like to enroll my child or my grandchild in that school. And also, of course, we have information about the book by Robert Littlejohn and Charles Evans, Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian Paradigm for Classical Learning. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Several months ago on this program, we discussed the religious practice of kaporos. It literally means atonement and has been a religious tradition of Orthodox Jews for over 2,000 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, some Orthodox Jews will recite scripture and then swing a live chicken over their head while reciting a prayer like, "This is my substitute, this is my exchange, this is my atonement. This fowl will go to death, and I will enter upon a good and long life." The chicken is then butchered in the kosher fashion, and the meat of the chicken is then often donated to those in need of food. The ceremony invites the participants to contemplate their own mortality and appreciate the atonement of their sins. We represent the Chabad of Irvine that was sued by animal rights activists in federal court during the Holy Week of October of 2016. I'm pleased to report that that lawsuit was recently dismissed. We will continue to defend this synagogue at the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, but the practice should continue for at least the foreseeable future. Rabbi Alter Tenenbaum expressed his relief well. He said, "We are overjoyed that the judge saw the wisdom of protecting our ability to practice a cherished tradition of our faith. This is a great victory not only for the synagogue, but for all Americans who value our constitutional freedoms." To learn more about this case and how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have Robert Littlejohn with us for just a few more minutes, and we also have a link to the Covenant School. It is covenantdallas.com, or you can simply just go to pointofview.net. We have the link right there. And either way, this is for just a minute. I want to spend some time talking about the school. There may be some people saying, okay, you've convinced me. I've got a child in public school. Maybe I've been homeschooling. Maybe they're even in a Christian school, and I'm thinking, I like this classical Christian school model. Now, what's entailed in terms of a student? What kind of preparation do they have to have? What do you expect from the students? What do you expect from the parents?
Well, of course, the earlier we can enroll the student, the younger that is, that we can enroll them, the better we believe. But we're also open to enrolling students as late as high school.
Mm-hmm.
So what students will find, again, at the Covenant School is that they really will be receiving a set of skills that really aren't, for the most part, really aren't being offered by other schools.
That's true.
But the transition isn't a difficult one. I think students can come in from various other schools. There is rigor. There is a high expectation, but we find that students generally rise to that expectation and perform well.
Mm-hmm. And so, again, there's an application process, I assume, and all sorts of things that they need to go through.
Yes.
And, again, I guess the question in parents' minds is, well, it's one thing to get them involved in 3K, 4K, kindergarten, whatever. But what if I've got somebody that's been in the public schools, maybe they're in middle school, and this is not working? Are they going to just feel like they're swamped because they're surrounded by other young people that have already learned Latin, read some of the classics, things like that? What about that particular issue?
Well, I think that students will find great support as they come in, and their families will find great support. I'm fairly new to Covenant myself, and people still ask me, so what attracted me to the Covenant School? And I have to say, well, two things: the people and the program. The program really is a cut above, if you will,
Yes.
your typical private school, your typical Christian school. So we are classical as well as Christian. So there is rigor, but it's not overwhelming. It's achievable.
Let me see if you can answer some of the other questions too, because we read about in Luke 2:52 that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. We've talked mostly about wisdom here. Talk for just a minute about the spiritual aspect, because I would assume that most people would gather that you have a Bible study and those kinds of things, but there's a whole dedication to the spiritual life of a student, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that just is part and parcel of everything that we do at the Covenant School. It's interesting. I've been disturbed for many years. I've served at two different Christian universities, and I've been disturbed to see so many young people who come from a Christian home. They've attended church all their life. Perhaps they've graduated from a Christian school, but they get into the college setting and they fall away from the faith. They walk away from the faith.
True. Yeah.
It's depending on who you believe, the percentages are somewhere between 60 and 85% of young people from Christian homes. I find it alarming. But what's the cause? I've asked this for many years, and I think Covenant gets it right. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And I would say that the unexamined faith is not worth keeping.
That's very well said.
And unless students have this opportunity in a safe environment, in a place where Christian adults can guide them and direct them, but still allow them to question, to doubt, to test their faith, unless they have that opportunity, then their faith really isn't theirs. It's mom's, it's dad's, it's pastors, but it's not their faith. And a faith that isn't mine isn't a faith that I can defend. So we take a different approach at the Covenant School.
And going back to that, in favor of God and man, and also stature, one of the questions that I think maybe some people have is, okay, are these classical Christian schools, they're just creating brainiacs? Is there any place for sports or athletics or that kind of thing? My young person wanted to play soccer or wanted to play football, something like that. Talk about what's available there.
No, thank you so much. I think historically part of the ancient classical approach to education included sport.
That's right.
It's part of the whole, educating the whole person. So yes, we do have at the Covenant School a robust sports program and a robust fine arts program. So we're educating the whole person. It's not just brainiacs, as you say, not just the academic side plus the spiritual side. It's the whole person.
And again, some people might say, okay, what will be my responsibility as a parent? I mean, I assume you have a PTF and things like that. What exactly are the expectations of a parent if once I enroll my child in your school?
Well, great question. As you pointed out when we were off air, my co-author, Chuck Evans, actually preceded me at the Covenant School. He was there for a year as the interim head of school, and he described this school as community on steroids.
Yes.
People are so very involved at the Covenant School, which is, I think, a joy to all of these families. It's not just about enrolling your child and disappearing. It's about engaging with the broader school community. I'm seeing that deep adult friendships are being formed through involvement at the Covenant School. So it's really a whole family endeavor and something that, parents as well as children are just enjoying immensely.
And again, we have a link to the Covenant School on the website. If people, Dr. Littlejohn, say, I'd like to maybe get a tour, that's something that's available. Talk about what happens in terms of the next step.
Oh, absolutely. So, we will be having an open house in October, and that's published on our website. So we strongly urge people to come and see firsthand. This open house will actually be in the morning. So we're hoping that dads and moms can make arrangements if working to come and see what we're doing firsthand. And either before or after that, please call and make arrangements for a personal or individual tour of our campus. Once you're engaged in that application process, we encourage every student, whatever their age, to come and spend a day or a half day at the Covenant School, shadowing, being escorted, if you will, befriended by another Covenant student, and just experiencing what it's like to be part of the Covenant community for a day.
And you got Oz Guinness next week, so again, people can watch that as well.
That's right. On Wednesday for chapel is Oz Guinness.
That's very good. Well, thank you for giving us an hour today. I know a headmaster and a head of school usually are very busy people, so it means a lot that you gave us an hour today here on Point of View.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
We do have a link to the Covenant School. It's available on our website, pointofview.net. But let me also commend to you this book, Wisdom and Eloquence. Charles Evans, who we mentioned just a minute ago, and Robert Littlejohn wrote this book, and it is 215 pages, published by Crossway, endorsed by just kind of a who's who of individuals we've had on this program in the past, people like Gene Edward Veith and Al Mohler and Douglas Wilson and Bruce Lockerbie and others. And so, again, just some great material that is available to you. And if you would like to know more about classical Christian education, we have some links there. If you'd like to know more about the Covenant School, we have a link there as well. So thank you again for being with us. And let me just mention that as you go to the website, you're going to find a lot of articles related to education, including some of these that we would certainly commend to you. My Viewpoints commentary today is actually The Price of Greatness. And you might remember when we had Jay Cost in studio, we talked about two of the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. We have that commentary today. And of course, that will encourage you perhaps to buy another book, which I think is really one of the best books I've ever read on the subject of Hamilton and Madison and the founding of our country and the different visions that existed in the 18th century, which are playing out today, which we'll be talking about a little bit later in the program. But let's take a break. When we come back, we will continue our conversation. And if you'd like to know more, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Stay tuned. More to go right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me on this Thursday. We're certainly going to be praying and encourage people to be praying for those of you in the path of Hurricane Florence. And a little bit later, we're going to be talking about that. The Washington Post declares that President Donald Trump is complicit in that storm. I don't know how that works out. And a number of other people supposedly are as well. We'll get into some of the other news items in just a few minutes. But I wanted to bring a great interview to you right now, and that comes from Sadie Robertson, who, of course, was really catapulted into stardom as a young teenager, so of course being on the A&E hit reality series called Duck Dynasty. Then at the age of 17 years of age, remember when she became first runner-up on season 19 of ABC's Dancing with the Stars. Now, of course, older, but nevertheless has had a platform as a motivational speaker and an advocate for the younger generation. Also really using her creative and entrepreneurial spirit in all sorts of different business ventures, whether it's school supplies with Dayspring and jewelry and home goods with Glory House. And of course, you might remember also that she's ventured into acting, appeared in God's Not Dead 2 and I'm Not Ashamed, and also a starring role in the Hallmark movie Sun, Sand, and Romance, best-selling author. And this new book that has come out called Living Fearless, A Call to Power, Passion, and Purpose. And it is available in your local bookstore. We also have a link to it on our website in case you can't find it, although I'm sure you'll be able to find it, published by Thomas Nelson. And Sadie, thank you for joining us for a few minutes here on Point of View.
Yes, absolutely. So thankful to be on your show.
It is great to have you join with us. And you have had a lifetime of experiences at the age of 21. Is there ever a time when you can kind of just stop for a moment and catch your breath?
Oh, my goodness. It has been absolutely crazy, but in the best way. It's been crazy in a good way. And the good thing is now, the way that life is, although it's super crazy and busy, it's exactly the things that I'd love to do, and I'm getting to do it with mostly all my closest friends and my family. And so I feel like somehow God just worked it out to where I don't have to wait to catch a breath. It's just kind of, the whole thing is like just something I love to do, so it makes breathing easy.
Pretty good. Well, again, the book is entitled Live Fearless, A Call to Power, Passion, and Purpose. The first chapter, you kind of quote from Psalm 46, which is God is our refuge and our strength and ever-present help in trouble, and the idea that he is our fortress. As we think right now of some that are facing the fear of Hurricane Florence, that is certainly something that is a matter of prayer. But you talk about a different kind of fear. You grew up in a family where dancing wasn't a big deal, and were in environments where you weren't necessarily a dancer, so that's one of them. But, of course, you also have seen a tornado and others. So speak to this issue of fear, because you want us to depend on the Lord and to be fearless. Explain what you mean.
Yeah, so fear used to be a huge part of my story, and, you know, I think that fear is such a problem. It's such a limiting thing for not just my generation, for many, I think for humanity. I think that there's this lifestyle that you can live and choose to live in fear, or you can choose to believe that God is who he says he is and just take faith in that. And for me, I used to totally sit in the realm of fear. Understand there are things that are scary, that there are things that cause threat, just like this hurricane. It's a massive problem. It is really scary. But at the end of the day, where my problem was and where I stood was, well, yeah, God, what do you want me to do now that there is a hurricane and that is coming? You know, what do you want me to do now that there is a tornado right in front of my face? What do I do now that I am dancing and I don't know how to dance? Those kind of things, like you said, when at the end of the day, the tornado is still going to come, the hurricane is coming, the dance is still going to happen. And I just didn't really know where that faith was supposed to kick in if these things that hold threat are going to take place. And so that was always a confusing thing for me until I read Psalms 46, and everything changed. Because I think that for a long time, I would think, like, if this happens, then of course I'm going to be afraid. If the hurricane does happen, then of course I'm going to be afraid, God. Instead of when these things do happen, I'm actually going to choose to have faith. And in Psalms 46, it says, even when the mountains crumble into the heart of the sea, even when the oceans roar and foam, even when the kingdoms are falling and crumbling, even when the nations are in uproar, even when all of this is happening, those are the moments in your life that you're going to have to be still, as the scripture says, and know that he is God. Because humanly, we can't stop the wind and the rain. Humanly, we can't stop the thing that's going to happen. But by the power of God, he can. And so there's prayer that's involved, and there's calling down the power of prayer. But you can't live in that realm of fear. You have to just take faith. And so for me, it was just a big shift. And that after reading that verse, that's where the rest of the pages fall. That's where I was able to write this book, by just kind of living that lifestyle out and just seeing who this God is all about. And so that's why it was the beginning of the book, because I wanted people to understand if they were in that place with me, with like, I don't really know God because things are happening like that. I don't really know God because things are a threat, causing a threat. And then when I read that, I was like, oh, I get it. At the end of the day, I just have to know that you're God, and all I have to do is be still. And I think that being still, it seems like that's an easy thing, but that actually is a hard thing because it's surrendering control. And I think that a lot of times that's where the basic fear is just not having control over something.
You know, again, Psalm 46, as you said, it says, be still and know that I am God. That phrase, be still, actually is just one Hebrew word, so it could be just as easy still, or I sometimes say chill. You know, you hear the idea of chill out,
Yeah.
and, you know, it's really just one word, one Hebrew word there, but it's the idea of being still. And let me just, before we take a break here, talk about the fact that your book really breaks this down into 8 different chapters. And at the end of each chapter, you have a thing called So, which I love because they told you when you're on Dancing with the Stars, you use the word so too much. And you say, yeah, but that's a Southern thing. So when you do so, you kind of have some application points. And then you have a section called Work the Word. So there's some great material in each one of those. So this would be not only a great devotional book to hand to somebody, especially a fellow millennial, and we just did our Millennial Roundtable yesterday, but others that I think would benefit from the idea of living fearless. And I might also mention that we have a link to your website, liveoriginal.com. And so there's an opportunity for people to follow you on the website. We also, of course, have a link to your Facebook page and your Twitter page and all the rest. So when we come back, I want to get into a couple of other issues as well, because you talk about this idea of being fearless. Also, I love one time you're sitting around there and say, well, at least you're not that guy. And you said, at least you're not plankton. I want to explain the plankton story. And then also the idea of jumping off the crazy train. And we have with us for just a few more minutes, Sadie Robertson. And the new book is entitled Live Fearless. It is published by Thomas Nelson. As I said before, you probably can find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a link to it both in hardback and in Kindle. And we also, of course, have a link to her website, Live Original, and it is, again, an opportunity for you to follow the blog, the tour, and also learn a little bit more. So it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Sadie Robertson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, in theaters September 14th, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Sadie Robertson with us, the new book out, Live Fearlessly. And again, a call to power, passion, and purpose. Live Fearless. And again, this is something that is published by Thomas Nelson. Look for it in your local bookstore. And Sadie, I thought we'd just pick out maybe one or two other stories out of the book because there's so many to cover. But one of those is, you know, your dad had this kind of funny picture about this guy that was in a terrible situation and said, at least you're not that guy. So then you started having some fun around the table and in the living room saying, well, at least you're not that guy. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, you say, for reasons you still can't probably explain, well, at least you're not plankton. But you use that in a way to really get us thinking about this issue and what are plankton and what how we should think about this. So for people that are saying, how did Sadie come up with the word plankton and what does that mean? Can you explain that story?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the most bizarre thing. I honestly still don't know why I said, at least I'm not a plankton. Besides, that was just the spirit-less moment in the funniest way. But yeah, my family would always say if somebody was going through a bad situation, we'd say, well, at least you're not this guy. And then it would just be another person in a funny situation. Like ice cream was like spilt on their face, something silly. And for me, one day I was like, well, you know what? At least I'm not a plankton. And everybody's like, wait, what is a plankton? And I'm like, I actually have no idea. And so the only thing I knew about a plankton was honestly like the little character on SpongeBob, which is so random. And so I just like said that. Everybody thought it was funny. And then my family just kind of said it. John Luke, my brother, would always say, at least I'm not a plankton. And then one day, I know this sounds so bizarre, but I just kind of felt a spirit check of like, This is so weird, but what if you were? What if you were plankton? Could you find passion and could you find purpose in something that you think is the lowest of the low, but something that God breathed life into? And I was so challenged by this like weird spirit check that I had about saying at least I'm not a plankton that I decided that I was going to research what plankton was. So I look up what's a plankton, and Wikipedia, this is literally the definition of a plankton on Wikipedia. It says a small microorganism that is unable to swim against the current of the ocean for large fish or whales to eat. And I was like, okay, that's actually the worst thing that you could ever be. And so that spirit check was just affirming that this joke is funny and that it does make sense. And then after I researched that, I just felt again like, hey, there's something in this plankton life that I'm missing. So I went back. I watched YouTube videos. I mean, I dove in on plankton books. I was like full on. I even went to a University of San Diego to study with one of their plankton experts for a day who like teaches on all of the like fish. I was so in the study. And so what I come to find out what these plankton really are, yes, if you read the Wikipedia definition, you would be getting the smallest, the very least things that they are and that they do. It doesn't give it any justice because what these plankton are, the word plankton actually means in wonder. They're just little wonders. They drift. They drift along the ocean, and every single day they start at the very, very bottom of the ocean, or at night they start at the very bottom of the ocean, and they drift all the way to the top of the ocean. And what happens is they go through the process of photosynthesis, and they receive light from the sun, and that's how they feed themselves. Well, then every single day they go back down to the bottom of the ocean, to the darkest parts of the ocean, and they give the light that they received to the whole ocean floor, which, okay, already that's like a spiritual message, right? Because they went and received light from the sun, they brought it back down to the bottom of the ocean and gave light to the whole ocean. And they provide like 80% of the ocean's photosynthesis and the ocean's light, which is amazing. And like that to me is really cool. But what really got me is whenever you actually know what that means and understand that, that means that because of them providing all of that photosynthesis for the ocean, they're actually providing 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. And so without these plankton every single day going up and receiving light and going back down and giving life, we actually wouldn't have the oxygen and the ability to breathe because God put so much purpose in the smallest microorganism in the bottom of the sea that's unable to swim against the current of the ocean. And I love that because their purpose, like, they can't go outside of what God had already put in their life. Like, all they're supposed to do is drift, and because of them just drifting to, like, the original design that God placed in them, every single thing on the universe is able to breathe and have life. And so I was just, like, blown away by this revelation of what God did in the plankton, and I just thought, you know what, that is a message for everyone to hear. If God, like, if you don't think that you have purpose, like, if God can breathe purpose into the life of a plankton, like, imagine the purpose that he has for you. If you would just submit yourself unto him and just, like, literally go after the sun every single day, receive that light, and then go out and give life. And I was so encouraged. So I wrote it in the book because I just felt like that's one of those things in my personal life that I've been so impacted by. And I know just speaking on the Live Original tour that other young people have been too. And then I found, it's not just young people, it's adults too. And so I felt like that was important to put in the book.
Well, I think so, too. And again, just illustrating that you may think you're insignificant, but believe you're more significant than plankton. But look what the plankton do. And so it's just a great illustration.
Exactly.
And again, let me just pick out one more because we need to let you go, obviously. But you also talk about jump off the crazy train. And I thought people would enjoy that one for a moment as well. Just one other illustration from your book. And, of course, you even quote from your earlier book, Live Original, and you even talk about the fact that you have your two mama. Explain that if you might.
Yeah, absolutely. So two mama is my mom's mom, and two mama is amazing. She's the most practical woman in the world. She is, like, to the point where she'll just look at you and be like, girl, jump off the crazy train, or don't set up a tent in your mind. That's what she'll always say to us. And one of the things was she would say, jump off the crazy train.
Right.
And what that kind of meant was she would see our little mind going into like the worst case scenario. You know how it is. You think one thing
Right.
is bad, and then next thing you know, you are on the absolute crazy train.
And then you become
And,
fearful
like,
of things that never will happen, right?
Exactly, which in the book, that's what we talk about, this idea of fear being false evidence appearing real. And I didn't come up with that. Somebody else had said that to me that I thought was amazing. And because that's really what it is, this false evidence appearing real. But if you choose to think that this false evidence does represent something that's real, that's a really scary place to be, because sooner or later, you're on this train, you're going full speed ahead, and it becomes a crazy train. Next thing you know, you're like, how did I get here, and where am I? And I talk about this. I put this verse in that's from the Bible that it's really important to really know and to really soak on and think on. That in the Bible, God tells us the things to think about. He says, think about the things that are true. Think about the things that are honorable, that are right, that are pure, that are lovely, that are admirable, that are excellent, and that are worthy of praise. And if it doesn't line up with that, if it doesn't match that, then jump off. Then get off of the train, because it's not going to lead you anywhere that you need to be going. And I think that one of the things that I always say about the crazy train is that, you know how you see movies and it's like somebody's on a train, it's like going towards like dynamite. It's like old cartoons would have situations like that. And I think that it's important to take note that, like, when you're on a train, sometimes you can't see that dynamite's at the end of the track. But the people who are watching the train go by, they can see. And so it's really important that you know who's watching your train and you listen to what they're saying is ahead, like godly counsel, like your parent, like your friend saying, hey, boo-boo, there is dynamite at the end of the track, jump off. And when you hear that, jump off, get off of that. But if you don't have those people surrounding you in your life, then you can just go off of the scripture by saying, is it true? No, jump off. Is it honorable? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? Is it excellent? Is it worthy of your praise, God? Because if it's not, then I'm getting off. And that message in itself for me has been so impactful, because I think if anything will take me out, it won't be the world, it'll be my own mind. And so I just think that for me, I need to jump off the crazy train sometimes.
Yes. Well, again, just an excellent set of resources that are available in this book, Live Fearless. And we've just given you sort of vignettes into about 3 of the 8 chapters. And again, you can get all of that as you get the book. It is available in your local bookstore. We have a link to it on the website. We also have a link to Live Original and the tour and the blog and all of that available at the website. And of course, we also have a link to the Twitter and Facebook links for Sadie Robertson. So, Sadie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so great talking to you.
Well, we've talked with most of the Robertson clan, and that one finishes off one more. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about Hurricane Florence and also how some are already blaming the president before anything's happened. And, of course, I guess we've seen that before. And also some that have been critical of Judge Kavanaugh's daughters. Really? And we got a lot more to cover. We'll get into all that right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this Thursday. And again, we certainly want to encourage our listeners to be praying for those who I know will be impacted by Hurricane Florence. We don't know what the damage will be, but we know it will be extensive. And we certainly pray for those of you that may be listening to this today as you're driving out of that area, because I know we have quite a number of listeners in North Carolina, South Carolina, and that area where that it will probably hit. One of the things I thought about talking about, and then I thought, maybe not. Now everybody else is talking about it. Might as well focus on it as well. And that is the editorial board of the Washington Post in an editorial that at first I thought somebody must have made a mistake, or this must be something from what's called The Onion, or this is a satire. There's no way somebody said this, but apparently they have. They actually declared that President Trump is complicit for Hurricane Florence because of his view on climate change. Now, if you've listened to this program, you know that we recognize that climate changes. Climate has changed. We've had the medieval warming period. We've just come out of what's called a little ice age. All of the variations that we have seen in the weather and in the climate of the Western Hemisphere have, in most cases, taken place before there were SUVs, before there were coal-fired energy plants and the rest. So we recognize that climate changes quite a bit anyway. We've had a major ice age. We've had a little ice age. We had, as I mentioned just a minute ago, a medieval warming period. There was a time in which grapes were raised in England. One of the reasons that the Vikings were more successful is because there was a lot less ice in Greenland. You remember from your geography lessons that there's ice in Greenland and not so much ice in Iceland, and all the kinds of things about that we can talk about. And we've seen the variations in climate. Now, is climate changing now? Yes. How much of that is due to human activity? We can have that debate, but nobody believes it's 100%, and I don't think really anybody believes it's 0%. There's obviously somebody that might skeptically deny all of that, but when you look at the variations of solar cycles, when you look at El Nino and La Nina, you look at all sorts of other things, you can explain a very significant amount, if not all of it, on the basis of the natural variations that take place because we are on a planet that is cycling and circling the sun. But also you have the variations of the sun itself, and you have the various climate factors. And so to actually, first of all, say that all these hurricanes are due to climate change is a little bit chancy. But then to say that it's all due to human activity brought about by climate change is really off the scientific pier, I think, a little bit. And yet, nevertheless, this is what we have. So the actual statement by the Washington Post is that another hurricane is about to batter our coast, and Trump is complicit. Now, if you think of the word complicit, that means he's at fault. In other words, he did it, or he had some reason for it. And that's really bizarre. Now you've seen some other individuals who have had questions about human-induced climate change being also listed as complicit. And the only positive in this article from the Washington Post is at least at one point, the piece did give President Trump the fact that he had given good advice when issuing hurricane warnings via the Twitter feed before he said some other things. And again, when it comes to extreme weather, it says Mr. Trump is complicit. He plays down humans' role in increasing the risk, and he continues to dismantle efforts to address those risks. It's hard to address or attribute any single weather event to climate change. Well, thank you for at least that level of scientific sanity. But there is no reasonable doubt that humans are priming the Earth system to produce disasters. And, of course, that all comes from the editorial board. Well, love to hear from some of you that might find yourself in the path of Hurricane Florence. Do you blame the president? And of course, we know where this is going because apart from just that statement, you've over the last couple of days, if you haven't been paying attention, they've ratcheted up the rhetoric, reminding us of how George W. Bush was probably complicit at that time with Hurricane Katrina, how President Trump didn't do enough for Puerto Rico, and on and on and on. And so they're already priming the pump, if you will, to whatever disaster there is, blaming the President of the United States. Now, the President, as I've said before on this program, deserves some blame for a number of things, but that's not one of them. One of these articles came out recently in which they quoted from Chris Barron. I don't know much about him, but he's a strategist, and I thought his lines were pretty helpful. He said, the media won't give Donald Trump credit for the economy, but they will blame him for a hurricane. He says, you can't make this stuff up. He says, this column is so absurd, it should be coming from The Onion, not The Washington Post. And again, if you're not familiar with The Onion, it's just satire. Babylonian Bee is another one that's done in the Christian realm. But anyway, Chris Barron goes on to say, the extent that climate change is happening, it is a global phenomenon that has been occurring for decades and decades. The media won't give Trump credit for the economy, but they'll blame him for the hurricane and all the rest of the statements he makes there, which I just think we'll leave at that point. But again, we certainly encourage our listeners to pray for those who, I don't know where the actual landfall will take place, but whether it's Cape Fear to Cape Lookout, we know that that is going to be significant. And so I just thought that I would bring it up because it is just one of those ones where you just have to roll your eyes. But at the same time, the sad reality is there's some people that read this and really believe it, and that's a concern as well. Let me take another eye roller, one that concerned me, and that is that we have been following over the last few weeks here, and we'll follow it up until the vote next week, on Judge Kavanaugh to be the next Supreme Court justice. Now, one of the things that Beth Bowman points out is if there's one thing in America that is learned during the Brett Kavanaugh Senate confirmation hearings, it is that politics is an ugly, ugly game. And the worst part, politicians' kids aren't exempt from being the scapegoat. Now, our philosophy around this has always been the same. Leave the kids out. Going all the way back to when occasionally somebody would make a joke about Jimmy Carter's daughter, Amy Carter, or later on with Ronald Reagan, or George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Chelsea, or even more recently, Barack Obama. But nobody seems to play by those rules, and this particular individual posted tweet after tweet after tweet, which just kind of got me. And she said, Senator Ben Sasse just told Brett Kavanaugh, I hope your daughters still get the day off from school. And so then she used that to put out all sorts of, I think, pretty weird and in some cases pretty mean-spirited tweets. One of them was, Senator Ben Sasse told Brett Kavanaugh, I hope your daughters still get the day off from school. And so this person said, well, I hope his daughters get to go to school without being shot. Oh, well, that was really nice, okay. Joke about school shootings. Haven't seen that one before. Here's another one. Ben Sasse just told Brett Kavanaugh, hope your daughters still get the day off from school. She said, I hope your daughters still get to grow up and marry whoever they want. Of course, that's a shot on whether or not he would support same-sex marriage or not. Of course, I really don't know where he would stand on it, but that's certainly, she's come to that conclusion. Here's another one. Ben Sasse just told Brett Kavanaugh, I hope your daughters still get the day off from school. This time she says, I hope your daughters get to grow up and still have health care, Medicare, and Social Security, which is really a cheap shot then, if nothing else, because, Social Security may not exist in the future, but Brett Kavanaugh has nothing to do with that. I mean, this was implemented by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and even as it was implemented, it had particular flaws in the program. And right now, the borrowing from Social Security, which has been done by both Democratic and Republican administrations and Republican and Democratic Congresses, have nothing to do with Brett Kavanaugh, but okay. That's the other cheap shot. And then just one more real quickly, and then we'll get to some phone calls here. Ben Sasse, Senator Ben Sasse told Brett Kavanaugh, I hope your daughters still get the day off from school. And this particular tweet, I hope his daughters still get to have their reproductive rights, which, of course, is the whole issue of abortion, which has just become almost the most sacrosanct part of any kind of discussion. How does a Supreme Court nominee stand on the issue of abortion? And even if, as I always like to point out, even if, and I don't see it happen anytime soon, but even if the Supreme Court rules against Roe versus Wade, you know what? It just goes back to the states. And various states would maybe have more liberal principles towards abortion, and others would be more conservative, but it certainly would not outlaw abortion in America, but it might make it even more difficult to obtain in certain states. That is the worst case scenario. But let me take a break. When we come back, I've got some phone calls coming in, and I wanted to give you a chance to join our conversation. I put a few things on the table, and that's everything from climate change and Hurricane Florence to attacking Judge Kavanaugh's daughters. Have some things to say about police shootings, but let's take a break. We'll come back with your phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Several months ago on this program, we discussed the religious practice of Kaporos. It literally means atonement and has been a religious tradition of Orthodox Jews for over 2,000 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, some Orthodox Jews will recite scripture and then swing a live chicken over their head while reciting a prayer like, "This is my substitute, this is my exchange, this is my atonement. This fowl will go to death, and I will enter upon a good and long life." The chicken is then butchered in the kosher fashion, and the meat of the chicken is then often donated to those in need of food. The ceremony invites the participants to contemplate their own mortality and appreciate the atonement of their sins. We represent the Chabad of Irvine that was sued by animal rights activists in federal court during the Holy Week of October of 2016. I'm pleased to report that that lawsuit was recently dismissed. We will continue to defend this synagogue at the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, but the practice should continue for at least the foreseeable future. Rabbi Alter Tenenbaum expressed his relief well. He said, "We are overjoyed that the judge saw the wisdom of protecting our ability to practice a cherished tradition of our faith. This is a great victory not only for the synagogue, but for all Americans who value our constitutional freedoms." To learn more about this case and how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
A few more minutes. Let's spend some time, if we can, looking at a couple of these very important issues. And we'll go to, first of all, Scott in Missouri. Scott, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kirby. Thanks for taking my call. I've called a number of times, but there was one thing you talked about with climate change that I'd like to add a little bit to it.
Sure.
I have actually, as a part of a doctoral thesis that I've been working on for a number of years. You can pray that I finish that. But I have actually done some two-dimensional and three-dimensional modeling of tornado flow interacting with buildings, different types of buildings, like rectangular buildings and circular buildings. And the professor that I've been dealing with on this at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas, he's been working on this computer program for 30 years. And just to be able to get this program to function, it has taken him 30 years, and it's a rudimentary program. The fact that the meteorologists have tried, and in fact, as a side note, this is the only guy in the whole world that's figured out how to create a tornado rotation and an interaction with a building in 3 dimensions. So we've got there's one guy that's doing this. Actually, there was a guy down in New Mexico, I think, that did some years and years ago, back in the 70s. But there's not very many people who can do it. But the fact that it's taken this long just to get a simple problem of a tornado interacting with a building.
So many variables.
Yeah, the variables are so many.
Yes.
These climate change models, in my opinion, are laughable because we have just in the past 20 years created enough radar data to be able to figure out at a rudimentary level what the climate is doing, let alone try to predict what it's going to do in 40 or 50 years. And even with this hurricane, you can see that the prediction of the hurricane landfall, even 4 days out, was wrong. And I had a suspicion it was wrong because when you look at the United States, there was a huge high pressure in the middle of the United States, and that high pressure was going to affect how this hurricane made landfall, and sure enough, it's doing exactly that.
Sure.
It's pushing that hurricane just slightly south once it gets closer to the shoreline. So you can see that even trying to predict the landfall of a hurricane 3 or 4 days away is an enormous task, let alone try to figure out how climate is going to change over the next 40 or 50 years. I thought I'd just add that to your conversation for people to chew on.
You know, when I was in graduate school at Yale, we actually had some computer models using, at that time, forests and things like that. And one of the things we said is that after measuring these trees and things like that, if we came up with something that looked pretty close to the prediction, then we would think our model was good. And I remember even we were at one point looking at weather, and I took a class in meteorology. I actually just sat in on it, and after looking at the integral calculus, I said, I'm getting out of here. But nevertheless, when you have a model that pretty much gives you an accurate prediction over time, then you say, okay, the model's probably accurate. But when these computer models are so wildly off, you know that we're missing some very important variables, as you point out. And if it took 30 years to develop something for a tornado hitting a building, imagine how much more complex the global climate is. And that's why, again, I think you have to take these models not just with a grain of salt, but at least a huge bag of salt, because there's just a lot that we simply don't know about meteorology, even in the 21st century.
Yes, and again, I'd appreciate your prayers to help me get that thesis done.
Sounds good. Let me let you go. I wanted let's see if we can go to somebody in North Carolina right now. I think Andrea says she's calling from Morehead City, North Carolina.
Yeah, right
Andrea?
in it, Kirby. I am in Florence in a trailer.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I mean, God is good.
I don't think that's a good idea. Are you going to get out of there?
No, it's not. No. My goodness, that we had a mandatory evacuation, but never had a curfew. Well, I was going to go to my girlfriend's house today. I've done this Kirby and cinder block, and it's been fine. But I didn't do Irene in a trailer, and I was not going to do Florence in a trailer. But they did a curfew, and I didn't know about it. And so when I was going to go, 10 o'clock this morning, you're not supposed to be on the road. So here I am watching things blow around, and I've already picked up some firewood around without getting hit in the head. And I feel like I'm on Spectrum News. I watched a limb fall on my neighbor. They've all left. There's only 2 people here in 38 trailers. There's a guy behind me and my husband, and my husband wishes I wasn't here. So at any rate, we're here, and pray for us. But no, this is I got all the wind speeds, man. I got all the wind speeds. I got the landfall. I got the wind direction, all that. But you know what? It doesn't make me feel any better, Kirby.
I'd say so. Well, again, I would encourage people to pray for Andrea. I was saying that everybody should leave, and if you haven't left by now, I think you still might be able to get out on the road, but we will see what this brings. But as I pointed out just a few minutes ago, Hurricane Florence, it's going to be devastating, but blaming President Trump for this and saying he's complicit because he doesn't accept this particular view that people have about climate change, I think is a bit much. So that's one of the issues I want to put on the table. One other one, which we'll come back to, is the very good piece that came out by David French the other day, in which he was saying that he's been paying attention to a shooting that took place not far from where I'm broadcasting. And if you're not familiar with the story, it's now become a national story, but it was primarily a Dallas story before, of this police officer who parked at the wrong floor, came to what she thought was her apartment, puts in the key card, and it's already somewhat open. Then again, this is according to her story. And again, there's a reason to maybe be skeptical about it, but I'm just going to tell the story. She thinks she's in her own apartment. She sees a man in the darkness, claimed that he was a burglar, and shot and killed him. And so if there's ever been a case in which you've got an off-duty police officer who made a really bad mistake, and that's an understatement for sure, it just illustrates exactly one of the issues that is kind of front and center right now. And David French says, if nothing else, we need to acknowledge both ideas simultaneously. That is, we have some outrageous killings that have taken place. Walter Scott fits into that category. Philandro Castile, and this individual name is Bothan Jean. Those are obviously outrageous killings. But at the same time, on the other side, we have individuals making up things or engaging in hoaxes like hands up, don't shoot, or one case, an individual supposedly was killed by holding a book, and that is not the case. And I love what he says. There is a point in which we have to reject some of the extreme ideas on both sides. He says a person can walk and chew gum at the same time. One can rightly condemn riots and radicalism while also noting that each time a bad cop walks free, it damages the fabric of trust between government and its citizens. And whether it's this issue of police shootings, whether it's immigration, or for that matter, even this issue of climate change, if there's one thing that we certainly have wanted to do here on Point of View is reject some of these extreme positions and kind of bring people to what I call the common sense middle, where in the case of these shootings, we can recognize that some of them are outrageous. Some of those demand justice be brought. And in other cases, there are people that are pulling examples out and using that to justify all sorts of views that aren't appropriate as well. And so we probably will get back to this next week as we get into a little bit more about this police shooting. But it's just a reminder that we're looking for some common sense. We're looking for some balance. And I hope that you find that when you listen to Point of View. Pray for everybody in the path of Hurricane Florence. And when we come back, we've got a wonderful story with Katie Norris. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour we're going to spend some time talking about some of these faith-building films. And of course, if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that whenever a film is coming out from a major studio or even from an independent filmmaker, we really like to feature it because, if nothing else, we want to send a signal to Hollywood and to other film producers that we really want more of these faith-affirming films. And this one, I think, is going to be very interesting because we're going to talk about a series of films that come from Photolanthropy. That is a word that I think you will get a better appreciation for in just a minute, because we have in studio with us a Dallas-based photographer and filmmaker, Katie Norris. And she really took a leap of faith when she founded this organization 7 years ago. Have produced more than 20 films that really share some inspiring true stories of individuals. I might just mention that the trailer for one, which is about 3.5 minutes long, is called 7 Yards, I should say. And it is something that I know you will appreciate in just a minute. Let me also mention another one, Travis, A Soldier's Story. And so those of you that are watching online can see me pulling some of these up. Luckiest Man and some others. So there's all sorts of films that we're going to be talking about today. But at the same time, this has just been an incredible organization which has really made up primarily of photographers and filmmakers documenting some of these inspiring true stories of people that have been able to overcome adversity. So, Katie, it's just great to have you in studio with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
I want to talk about your background a little bit, because this was a step of faith. It's one thing to be a photographer or a film producer, but then you create what's called Photolanthropy, photo for the photo, and then lanthropy, like philanthropy. You've been able to put together some wonderful films that I know our listeners are going to want to know more about.
Thank you so much. Well, it's an amazing story, and I really look back and know just God had his hand on this, and I would have never dreamt that I would be producing full feature documentaries. But how I got started, I was building my own photography business in Dallas and loved that, but quickly realized I was doing my passion as my career. And as a photographer, I really wanted to make sure I was protecting that love of capturing stories and people and never letting anything get in the way of that, so I could serve my clients and my families better. And I really just began to get a nudge. And we all know that that was just a very hard tapping from the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I love sharing this kind of story with you today, because I just couldn't get that mindset off my mind. And my husband encouraged me, Katie, why don't you start looking at nonprofits that you can get involved with? That'd be a great way to go serve, and that might fill that hole that you're experiencing. And so I did. I spent all day, I'll never forget where I was, just looking and searching. And there's so many wonderful organizations to get involved with. However, I just kept feeling this tapping, and I wasn't seeing what I wanted to be involved with. And I am a passionate lover of true stories. My husband and I's first date was Pursuit of Happiness.
Oh, yes.
And something about those films always just lifted me up. And as I was looking at the need, I saw that there's so many families that are hurting, facing these storms. And what really do you want when you face those and you look back? You want it documented. Photos are priceless, and also film. And so I came up with this idea. He came home and said, which one are you going to sign up for? And I looked at him and I said, I think I'm going to start my own. And right then and there was a turning point, because he could have said, Katie, that's a really big dream. And instead he responded with, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. He sat down and he said, let's figure this out. And it took me a few months to get the courage to do this. I think with any big idea, you just kind of need that little nudge to go for it. And him and I prayed one morning. I said, I just got to get this Photolanthropy idea out of my mind, or I need to go with it. And not 30 minutes later, I get a call from a mother, and she is bawling. I can barely understand her.
Wow.
And she said, my name is Kara. You don't know me, but someone told me that you can help me. And my son is 8 months old and was just diagnosed with a brain tumor. And I wasn't a mother yet at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can barely breathe thinking of me having to say those words about my daughter, Rose. But I just knew in that moment, I looked up and streams coming down my face. And I looked up at God and said, got it.
Got it. Here
Got
it
it.
is. Here's our new story.
And I just said, Kara, I would be so honored. We want to bless you today. We want to give you a portrait session, a short film, anything that we can do. And, I look back at that time, and it's so important to our team because we hope that we'll find the calling for our life. And I really got a phone call, and I take that to heart. And I know as long as I feel called that this is my mission and this is what I was made to do.
One of the other aspects is you develop what's called PhotoStrap, and that's one of the ways in which you funded that. Explain that for a minute.
Exactly. So when I started my photography business, the economy had just erupted in 2008. And so it just didn't feel right at the time yet to go seek out donations. We had credibility to build, and I never wanted to have the financial aspect to be the reason that we didn't get to serve.
Right.
So I knew right away I had to create something that could help sustain us. And so I got my creative entrepreneurial side out, and we designed a camera strap called the PhotoStrap. And that has been around as long as Photolanthropy. And with every purchase, 10% goes into Photolanthropy. So at one time, we were building an organization and building a retail company that now retails nationwide and worldwide. And our customers are amazing because they know they're serving our greater mission to tell inspiring stories that will impact the world.
Once you let people know that you're producing films, I suspect that you get quickly overwhelmed by people saying, hey, have you ever thought about telling my story? How do you even choose those?
Exactly. And I'm so thankful that we can be a place for that. It's a hard position to be able to take those phone calls. For example, one of our stories is of a young woman in Dallas whose young husband was diagnosed with cancer, and he was on hospice. And I received in one night 4 nominations from different people saying, can you come help this family and serve? We wanted Photolanthropy to help. And that is just such an honor to say, yes, we can help you. We'll be there. And so we prayerfully consider every story. We wish we could take every story. And at this season that we're in right now, we're focusing mainly on one so that hopefully it can make a larger impact for the kingdom.
Yes. Well, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about a couple of them. First of all, the one that we'll spend a little bit of time on is one that you're still working on. It's the Chris Norton story called 7 Yards. Now, you have heard this program enough to know that one of the things I suggest is for you to watch the trailer. It's about 3.5 minutes long, and then click the share button. Put it on your Facebook page, put it maybe on a Twitter feed, or send it to someone that might be encouraged. And you'll, as you hear the story, say, yes, this is going to be very encouraging. And then we'll sort of tell the backstory of a couple others. Travis, A Soldier Story, The Luckiest Man, and just a few of the others, because after all, there's 20. We won't cover all of them in our time together. But I thought it would be good for you to get a sense about Photolanthropy. And it is, again, an incredible opportunity for the recipient to have a portrait session, album, and digital images, but also, of course, a platform for their story. And some of these stories are so encouraging, so inspirational, that I thought you would really want to hear from Katie today. So we have her in studio. If you would like to join the conversation at any point, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Or just sit back and listen to this storyteller tell us about some of these incredible stories of inspiration and success. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two of the founding fathers that deserve more attention are Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. While the Hamilton musical provides us with some perspectives and entertainment, I would recommend the book by Jay Cost, The Price of Greatness, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of American Oligarchy. He was on the Point of View radio program to talk about his book. These two men belonged to a political movement with three fundamental foundations. The first was the commitment to liberal government that emphasized the protection of individual rights. The Declaration of Independence argued that governments are instituted among men in order to secure certain unalienable rights. That idea, written by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced by the writings of John Locke. The second foundation was a belief in self-government, often referred to as republicanism. A republic allowed the citizens to be governed by laws that they actually had a hand in creating. A monarch did not hand down these laws. They were established by we the people. The third foundation was nationalism. The 13 separate colonies agreed to bind themselves together in a national union of 13 states. This is where there was the greatest division between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, and they ended up dividing Hamilton from Madison. Hamilton emphasized national vigor and was eager to promote the Bank of the United States and other programs that would grow the national government. Madison, on the other hand, wanted to pursue what he called the Republican balance. He feared that Hamilton's policies favored the wealthy. In reading this book by Jay Cost, I was struck by the reality that many of the debates in the founding of this country continue to this day. Many of the ideas put forward by Hamilton and Madison are still debated today in the halls of Congress. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, in theaters September 14th, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Katie Norris, and Katie Norris is with, of course, Photolanthropy, an organization she started 7 years ago. And if you say, okay, what are these films like? Well, the good news is we have posted a trailer of 7 Yards. Now, this is the story of Chris Norton, which, by the way, is a documentary and has also been featured on ABC, CNN, Good Morning America, People Magazine, Fox News, to mention just a few. So obviously, some people might have heard part of it, but let's tell the whole story. Chris Norton is an incredible individual that after a tackle on the football field is told that he has at best a 3% chance of walking again. Tell us the rest of the story.
Absolutely. So just imagine being 18 years old, starting college, on top of the world, getting to play as a freshman. And, he had a tackle that was just timed incorrectly. It was a freak accident, and he laid lifeless on the football field.
Yes.
His family was there and ran to him, and they were flown to the helicopter that night and realized you've got a 3% chance. And what's incredible about Chris is just imagine someone at 18 years old being in that situation and how they would respond.
Oh, sure.
But because he was an athlete and because he came from a strong Christian faith, right away he knew, I have to fight this and I have to see the light of the 3%. I'm going to find hope in that. And I think just that alone is something to celebrate, because just the maturity of an 18-year-old, and he definitely had hard days, but from day one, he knew to pray and to see hope. And throughout these 7 years, he's just completely defied odds. I came across this story because a few years later, he was able to go back to college and he wanted to get his diploma just like every kid. and he had the goal to walk across the graduation stage.
Right.
And I came across that video, which 300 million other people did in the world, and was just brought to tears. And again, God gave me that stirring and that very strong pat on my back and said, this is the next one. And we knew it. And I wanted to know in that moment, how did he get here? Who is this beautiful girl supporting him and holding him as he walks, and what's next? So we were able to call him up and just let him know we're filmmakers out of Dallas. And we just kind of started connecting. And he called me about 2 years ago and said, I've got my next goal and I want to walk Emily down the wedding aisle. And that's where we began the relationship, and we began production of 7 Yards. And all of our films are in the documentary format. And we're so thankful for that format because we want to be able to tell the full, in-depth, real stories. Everything that you hear is from the real people. You're going to listen to the parents who ran down the field. You're going to listen to the coach that made that decision to let Chris play, from the player that injured Chris, from the physical trainer that walked with him in his first steps. You know, when someone faces adversity, a community is impacted. And, you know, we know just in the world that we live in, and what I'm so passionate about is we're just getting fed constantly with hard things. The media, the social media, the content options that we're getting are so depressing. You know, my husband and I are very, try to be very intentional about what we watch, and we just feel dissatisfied when we go on Friday night to watch something. And what I love about this is when people are facing adversity and facing the seasons in life, what we want is we want to relate with someone. And it's so encouraging. We could say, you know what, if he can get through that, if he can walk again, maybe I can do this in my own life, whatever that means, whatever they're facing. And so this film, that is a lot of our hope, that it can reach people, that can bring renewed hope and perspective. And it covers so many themes that I think a lot of people will be able to connect personally in some way.
You know, we think about Chris Norton being the hero, but Emily is also the hero. It reminds me, this film coming out right now, Unbroken, of course, it's about Louis Zamperini, but in some respects, this second edition now of Unbroken, The Path to Redemption, the real hero is the wife. And in this case, Emily knows full well that he may never walk again. So her choice to love him and to be beside him and to first help him walk across the stage when he gets his diploma, and then we'll get to the wedding later on and explain the 7 Yards concept for just a minute. She's a real big hero in this, isn't she?
She is. And, you know, a lot of people just automatically assume they were dating when he got injured, and they weren't. I love this story. They actually met online, and they wanted to pick a safe place to meet each other. She was aware that he was in a wheelchair, and they met at a hot dog stand in a very public place. But he really, it's beautiful hearing him tell the story, because as soon as she appeared, she never made him feel that he was different. And imagine being that age, just not knowing if you were going to be able to date or get married or have kids. And, you know, she's really been an angel in his life and just made him feel that he can do anything. She drives him, she champions him, and it's inspiring to watch, you know, to watch a now spouse really say, you can do this. And I think she is responsible a lot just to why he's continued to stay strong and keep such a good mindset. She's got a great heart. She's got a heart for foster care. And now that they're married, they're actually pursuing that passion in fostering kids. So it's pretty amazing, not only to watch her get Chris in the car, but 5 other foster kids in the car. It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing. And again, I think there's another theme through this, and that is don't look on the outer person, look on the inner person, because she said when she met him, she had kind of this checklist. And as she's meeting Chris, it's check, 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 check. You know, it's everything I was looking for, even though, quote, he was in a wheelchair. Let's explain, before we run out of time in this segment, the 7 Yards concept, because that takes us to the wedding day, doesn't it?
Yes. And so when we had these conversations with Chris, one of the first questions I asked was, how far do you think he could go? And what is your goal? And he took a long pause, and he said, I think I could go about this many feet. And then I said, you know, that sounds about 7 yards. And he said, yes. And I go, that's it. Let's let that be the goal. And so, for the past 3 years, he worked out 4 hours a day, every day, to be able to walk 7 yards. And if you're listening, I just want you to picture that length, because it's very sobering just to think of how short that is, and to think of 3 years, every day, 4 hours, to be able to not walk it by yourself, but be carried. And it was an incredible thing to experience. And everyone there got to watch him and her walk down that aisle. Our team was there and filmed that. And, I know God had his hand on this moment, because the media was attracted to this story, and it went viral and was shared on all the platforms. And I think people were just so refreshed to see something so beautiful and see someone just fighting so hard to be able to walk. And it was a very raw moment, and it's of course going to be included in the documentary, but it's really going to tell everything that got him to that point. And I think that's what the viewer is really going to be in a treat for.
When I was thinking, that's another theme that runs through that, perseverance, because you show lots of scenes where he's trying to pull himself up, trying to walk, having straps on and all the rest. And again, all that for 7 yards. Or it's like some of the athletes I've talked to over the years, the number of hours of every day, the number of years they work, so that then when they went to the football combine, they could run a 4.440 or 4.340, whatever they were trying to run, and so basically all those years for 4 seconds. And in this case, all those years for 7 yards. So it's just powerful indeed. Just before we take a break, we have a link to your website. If people say, I want to get one of those films or I want to watch them, how can they do so?
Yes, so you can find our film, Travis the Soldier's Story, on Netflix, iTunes, and Amazon. You could find The Luckiest Man on PureFlix. And we're really excited to see where the home will be for 7 yards. All of our short films are available for free on our website at Photolanthropy.com.
So we're going to take a break and come back, and we'll talk about those others, Luckiest Man and Travis, so that you can already see those right now, and then also let you know a little bit more about what you can do to be involved with 7 yards. So again, we are privileged to have in studio with us Katie Norris. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Don't know that you have a question, but maybe you do. Maybe you'd just like to know how they could do a film for you or something like that. You're free to call. Otherwise, sit back. We have a storyteller in studio today, and she'll tell some very helpful stories to you as well. And as you click on the website there, you're going to find a lot of great resources. So let me just encourage you to click on her picture, and that will first of all take you to Photolanthropy.com. Now, you don't need to know how to spell it. We've got it right there. Has some information about the documentaries, the films, the stories, the reviews. There's a store there as well. You can even donate to 7 yards. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And then we also have the trailer for you to watch, and that is something I would encourage you to do so. It's about 3.5 minutes long. And this is what I encourage you to do every time we do something with a Christian film or a faith-based film, because you're hearing about it, but you probably know other people that need to hear about it as well. So let's see if we can maximize the impact. Post it on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed, or send it by email to someone. And we'll continue our conversation with Katie right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation today with Katie Norris of Photolanthropy. Let me just mention that if you have some ideas, matter of fact, we just had somebody call in from Florida with an idea for a film, so there you go. Or they would like to contact you, they can go to photolanthropy.com. Now, people don't have to know how to spell it because we have a link there, but there's a place where you have a list of some of the documentaries, the films, the stories, the store, a blog, and all of the rest. So talk about what people will find when they do land on that website.
Sure. Our heart in designing this website was having content available for anyone facing any sort of adversity. We know that sometimes it's just nice to connect and relate, or if someone in your family's going through an unexpected season, we hope that our website can serve you and that you can go and look up a topic such as ALS, cancer, natural disaster, and find a film that will inspire you. It also has some other resources about, of course, who we are, what our mission is, and what we're up to.
Well, again, it is all available at the website. I know that people can support what is happening right now with 7 Yards financially, if they would want to do so. And if they would like to watch some of those films or find them, which are already available in a lot of different formats, that is the case. So let me take this one, the Travis, A Soldier's Story. Now, one of the things, Katie, we do quite often is really do what we can to appreciate and encourage those people that have served in militaries. As a matter of fact, this week we already did one program on PTSD. And of course, I just mentioned just a minute ago, Unbroken. Well, this one is a story, Never Give Up, Never Quit. Tell us Travis' story, because this one, again, has had national exposure, hasn't it?
Yes, sir. And, you know, things changed for me when I saw a picture of Travis Mills. Here's a quadruple amputee, which I had really never seen before. But what was so amazing and remarkable about this picture, he was at Walter Reed, no arms, no legs, and he had the biggest smile on his face I've ever seen. And I just knew right away there's something remarkable about this guy. And this was in 2012, and I found his phone number and said, we would love to come tell your story. And everything happened quickly. He said, great. Can you be here next week? And without a thought of how much that would cost or anything, I said yes. And it was the best yes I ever gave, because I got to meet one of our greatest American heroes. He was on his 3rd tour in Afghanistan on duty and set his bag down and was hit by an IED. He was a young father and a husband, and he was recovering at Walter Reed. And, you know, one of my favorite parts of the films is I get to interview everybody, and I'm just interviewing this guy and thinking, here's a man that has given everything he can for my freedom.
Wow.
What can we do for him? I want to give him my best because he's given us our best. And for us at Photolanthropy, we knew that we could make a full feature documentary. We knew we were ready. We said, let's do it. And that began our heart for making full feature documentaries, and Travis gave us the courage to start that. You know, my heart for this film was to give him an incredible night with a standing ovation. I just had this vision, and that's what we fought for. And so we were able to do that in Dallas. Over 500 people came out, and I had never experienced what we did in that theater. Grown men and women bawling.
Don't you know?
Servicemen and women coming out, showing their gratitude. Gold Star mothers just thanking us for sharing what's going on in their world, and caregivers in loss, and really honoring the brave. And what was remarkable is we thought it was a great night. We did it. And the next day the phone starts ringing off the hook. And, you know, people just said, we've heard about this film. Can we bring it to our theaters? And we spent the next year touring it. We got to share it with our leaders at the U.S. Capitol. And we got to bring people together to celebrate the bravest men that we know, the ones that are fighting for our country. Travis has got a contagious spirit. He was able to find hope and get the inner will and grit to fight because he knew he had a daughter at home and he wanted to get better. And he chose to have a positive mindset. And that's what makes him so remarkable. So it is an incredible story. Travis will make you laugh. He'll make you cry. And it was an honor of a lifetime to serve him.
I might just mention again, we have the wife, Kelsey, and the daughter at home, Chloe. So again, don't forget the home front, because they are the ones that suffer through all of this as well, don't they?
Exactly. And one thing that someone might enjoy if they watch that movie on Netflix tonight is the Army actually let us bring the combat medics that saved his life to come film and interview them. And one of them is Alex, and one of them name is Daniel. And Travis and Kelsey were blessed with a little boy, and they named him in honor of those combat medics that saved his life, and his name is Dax.
Yeah.
So if you're watching that, because this film was done 6 years ago, it's pretty neat to see the full circle.
And again, Netflix, of course, TravisTheMovie.com is another website that you can find there. And Travis, A Soldier's Story, Never Give Up, Never Quit. And again, it was a winner of a couple of short features. So you have just had an incredible career. But before we run out of time, and I have to let you go, let's, if we can, talk about one other one, The Luckiest Man. I happen to know this individual because you and I both have been at Northwest Bible Church in the past, so I know a little bit about this story. But again, this is another inspiring story that some of our listeners might want to know about. So tell us about that.
Anyone out there listening that is a business owner, a parent, I think this movie is so important. And John Payne's testimony is one of a kind. He was on top of the world and got a tingle in his arm and was diagnosed with ALS. One of the most horrific things we can ever imagine. And he has grown such a faith and perspective that I think is so moving. And it was an honor to make this film. And I'm excited for him. He's actually has a book also titled The Luckiest Man that's going to be coming out in November.
Very good.
And I think this is a story that God wants to hear. What's so remarkable about him, most people with ALS lose their voice first. That is the last thing he has lost. And I think that just shows that God wants to use his voice and his story and what God has done in his heart to make an impact. He's a beautiful man and soul, and he is now living with ALS for 18 years.
I know. Again, The Luckiest Man, and it is an inspiring true story. Don't wait until you're dying before you start living. And again, this is, one of those that you can watch, and I would encourage people to do so. But just before we let you go, let's talk about, again, what's available on your website, because there is an opportunity for people as they click on the store to, of course, have access to some of these resources, but also maybe some people would like to get a photo strap. So talk about how people can support what you're already doing, because these are inspiring stories and they're certainly worthy of people's financial support.
Sure. We appreciate that. You know, we are a 501c3 organization. Everything we do is made possible because of our donors. Every film that was made was because people believed in us and believed in the mission that we can bring stories of hope that can inspire the world. So there's a lot of ways you can support us. One is if you make a donation. Of course, that's going to help us continue this mission. If you donate over $100, your name will be forever on the credits of 7 Yards, which is pretty neat.
Yes.
You can pray for us. You can pray that there would be favor on 7 Yards and that this story could bring light and hope to the world, and just a world that's needing it. You could also go to our website, photostrap.com, spelled F-O-T-O strap. And there you can, be able to get a product or gift a product. And also know that the proceeds from that are going to benefit Photolanthropy. So hopefully there's a few ways, and we just appreciate your consideration. If you're in Texas, North Texas Giving Day is coming up on the 20th, and we're a part of that too.
Might just mention too that we have a link to your Twitter account and the Facebook page, as well as, of course, the website. And, of course, even the particular film, 7yardsfilm.com. It's the number 7yardsfilm.com. But again, we have all sorts of material on our website. And just before we let you go, Katie, let's talk about the future. You've got some other films in mind. Can you give us a preview of what might be happening next?
I do. It's really amazing just to see the conversations behind the scenes that we're having about 7 Yards, and the way that we think this film is going to be distributed is really exciting. And as a believer, it's very exciting. And so we're going to just follow the path there and see where God leads us. But there's been conversations about us having a full series. So people can come and not only experience one film, but a series. Another topic that is near and dear to my heart that I would love to document one day is about infertility and the fight that so many people are fighting for their families. My husband and I are one of those families that have suffered infertility. And so it's a big passion of mine. And I think there's a need out there that there's not a lot of resources that people can go to and find encouragement to keep moving forward.
Again, having written a book on artificial reproduction and genetic engineering years ago, I've gotten lots of phone calls from the modern day Hannahs that certainly would appreciate that. And that I know would be another powerful film. So Photolanthropy, if you haven't heard about it, you have now. And if you'd like to know more about it, we have a link to Katie Norris and her Facebook page, her Twitter account, the websites, and even a trailer, if you will, that I would like you to watch, about 3.5 minutes long. Click on the share button and send it on to someone else. Katie, thanks for being in studio with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time so much.
We'll come back with some final comments, and then we'll be done for the day. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Several months ago on this program, we discussed the religious practice of Kaporos. It literally means atonement and has been a religious tradition of Orthodox Jews for over 2,000 years. On the eve of Yom Kippur, some Orthodox Jews will recite scripture and then swing a live chicken over their head while reciting a prayer like, "This is my substitute, this is my exchange, this is my atonement. This fowl will go to death, and I will enter upon a good and long life." The chicken is then butchered in the kosher fashion, and the meat of the chicken is then often donated to those in need of food. The ceremony invites the participants to contemplate their own mortality and appreciate the atonement of their sins. We represent the Chabad of Irvine that was sued by animal rights activists in federal court during the Holy Week of October of 2016. I'm pleased to report that that lawsuit was recently dismissed. We will continue to defend this synagogue at the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, but the practice should continue for at least the foreseeable future. Rabbi Alter Tenenbaum expressed his relief well. He said, "We are overjoyed that the judge saw the wisdom of protecting our ability to practice a cherished tradition of our faith. This is a great victory not only for the synagogue, but for all Americans who value our constitutional freedoms." To learn more about this case and how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention tomorrow is our weekend edition. We'll get back into some of these issues, but again, I hope that we will all be praying for the potential victims. Let's hope that they are few, if none at all, would be wonderful for Hurricane Florence that is going to hit our coast, East Coast there, and so I certainly want to focus on that. But as I mentioned before, if there is one thing that has concerned me, it's how everything has become politicized. And a good example of that is how the Washington Post has said that President Trump is complicit for Hurricane Florence. Well, first of all, let's just think this through for just a minute. complicit for a hurricane that no one controls. So there is just a complete misusing of the term itself. And more importantly, when it comes to extreme weather, they say Mr. Trump is complicit. He plays down the human's role in increasing the risks and continues to dismantle and to address those risks. And, of course, that is the issue of climate change. First of all, let's be honest about the fact, as we've talked on this program so many times before, the whole evidence for climate change in terms of how much is actually human-oriented and human-created is up for some really interesting debate. And that's partially because since the Earth has only warmed a little, they moved it from global warming to climate change. Well, the climate has always been changing, and there have been remarkable changes in our climate on Earth over many, many years. And I've used the illustration countless times of the fact that we've had an ice age, we've had a medieval warming period, we've had a mini ice age that we're coming off right now. And a lot of that obviously has to be explained either on the basis of changes in solar radiation or various kinds of climatic situations like La Nina and El Nino and the rest, because back when those remarkable changes were taking place, we did not have SUVs, we did not have fossil fuels being burned to any significant extent. You also didn't have much of a human population on the planet. And so you recognize that some of those changes took place long before human activity in the Industrial Revolution may have made somewhat of a difference. And as I quoted earlier, an individual that I just started reading, Chris Bannon, don't know very much about him, but I just love what he said. You know, the media won't give Trump credit for the economy, but they'll blame him for a hurricane. You can't make this stuff up. And, of course, now more recently, you've had everybody saying, well, FEMA's going to be a disaster. But, again, they don't understand emergency management. If you have a crisis in your community, who do you call? 911. Okay? In most cases, if the local authorities can handle whatever that crisis might be, they bring an ambulance, they bring a fire truck, they bring a police force. If that can be handled locally, it doesn't go any further up the chain. If they can't handle it, then maybe the county gets involved. If the county can't handle it, then you start bringing in the state. And that's, you know, things like the National Guard and others. And only at the very top of the chain is FEMA. Do they own a lot of equipment? No. I mean, most of the police cars are not owned by the federal government. They're owned by what? The local communities, the hospitals, the ambulances, all the things necessary to actually address a crisis. Most of those are actually those which are at the local level. Then let's also be honest about the fact that these faith-based organizations have been so effective, whether it has been Samaritan's Purse, whether it's the Texas Baptist Men or a variety of others. Those are individuals that have made a profound difference. And then, of course, just local churches and Christian organizations going out and making a difference. And whether it was Hurricane Harvey and the so-called Cajun Navy, or just a lot of individuals with boats just saying, I'm going to go out there and rescue people. That's how we as Americans actually address the issue. But I guarantee you, in the next couple of days after the hurricane hits landfall, we're going to be hearing all sorts of things about the Trump administration, how awful it was and all the rest, and just recognize that at a time when there's a tragedy, we don't need to politicize it. But I know what's going to take place. Speaking of the politicized tragedy, I, of course, mentioned earlier about this one TV producer just kept taking aim on Brett Kavanaugh's kids. You know, I hope his daughters get to go to school without being shot. I hope his daughters still get to grow up and marry whoever they want. I hope his daughters grow up and still have health care, Medicare, and Social Security. I hope his daughters still get to have reproductive rights, and on and on and on. As some of us have said off air, you just wonder why anybody would put themselves through what has become such a debilitating and degrading process for a man that has such sterling character. And every time you turn around, there's another complaint that we didn't have enough documents. There were 500,000 documents. We haven't read all of his opinions. They've got 300 opinions. You can read them anytime you want. You could have read them even before he was announced. He's been on that short list for some time. Again, there is just so much to try to interrupt the process, and every turn there's something else, and we're going to see some more that we'll talk about tomorrow here on Point of View. But let me also, while we are focusing attention on the White House, on the Supreme Court, and even on Hurricane Florence, just for a moment, let me also focus attention on China. Our good friend Jerry Newcomb points out that they are burning Bibles in China. And most recently in the Associated Press, they noted that China's government is ratcheting up a crackdown on Christian congregations in Beijing and several provinces, destroying crosses, burning Bibles, shutting churches, and ordering followers to sign papers renouncing their faith, according to pastors in a group that monitors religion in China. Bob Fu is with China Aid, and that is a group that's been working there, and he says the international community should be alarmed and outraged at this blatant violation of freedom of religion and belief. He also points out that the government is reportedly demanding loyalty to the officially atheist Communist Party and eliminating any challenge to its power over people's lives. And the current president, in some respects, is starting to remind people of Mao Zedong, in terms of the fact that he's waging the most severe, systematic suppression of Christianity in the country since religious freedom was written into the Chinese Constitution in 1982. Now, some of you might say, well, I've got friends in China that aren't suffering. And, of course, one of the things that Bob Fu points out is simply this. Matter of fact, Todd Nettleton put it this way, Voice of the Martyrs, that these all could be happening simultaneously because China is a huge country. And he says, persecution and the thriving of the church can happen simultaneously. He once said, even in a television interviews that Jerry Newcomb did, whatever you've heard about China, it's true somewhere. China is a huge country, and there are places where the church is functioning with very minimal interference and functioning well. There are also places where Christians are in prison because of their Christian ministry. My own experience is I've got a good friend that has been in Beijing for years. She's not there now. And so things have happened in a way that is really sad to hear. And so, again, as you pray for those individuals that might be impacted by Hurricane Florence, also certainly be praying for the confirmation hearings, the final aspects of that for Judge Kavanaugh and his vote. Vote will take place next week. But also I hope you'll pray for the believers in China, one of the many places where Christians find themselves persecuted. So all sorts of information that we've tried to bring to you today here on Point of View. Tomorrow is our weekend edition. I hope you'll take the time to join us then. My Viewpoints commentary today is on the price of greatness, telling the story of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison in that book that we did an interview on in the past. And so we would certainly encourage you to get that Viewpoints commentary. If you want to find out more about some of the books and resources we've been talking about today, all available at the website pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. I hope you'll join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.